You know, for the first time in my life, I'm really shaking.
Don Knotts made 60 million Americans laugh every Monday night. He was beloved in a way that television rarely produces anymore. But the man behind the badge carried a secret that no camera ever captured. His smile was real. His comedy was genius. But his life off screen was a different story entirely. A story of 3 marriages that each ended in pain, and a regret so powerful that he carried it to his grave. This is the true story of Don Knotts and the heartbreaking end that waited for him and the woman who stayed by his side until the very last breath. The rise of Don Knotts. For millions of Americans, Don Knotts will forever be remembered as Deputy Barney Fife, the bumbling but well-meaning sheriff's deputy of Mayberry. Don Knotts was a man adored, a household name, and a legend of American television. However, the man behind the bug-eyed stare and the nervous twitch carried a weight that the audience never saw. His life, from its very beginning, was marked by a deep and personal struggle, one that would follow him from the small town of Morgantown, West Virginia, all the way to Hollywood. Behind the laughter, he battled a terrible problem, a shadow that affected everything: his career, his marriages, and ultimately, the way his own life came to a close. Don was born Jesse Donald Knotts on July 21, 1924. He was the youngest of 4 sons born to William Jesse Knotts and Elsie Luzetta Knotts. The family lived in a modest house in Morgantown, a coal mining community where the Great Depression was a daily reality. Money was scarce and life was hard. But harder than poverty was the atmosphere inside the home. Don's father, William, was a farmer and a mill worker, but he was also a man battling severe demons. He suffered from schizophrenia, a condition that was poorly understood at the time, and he was an alcoholic. For young Don, the smallest child in the house, his father was not a source of comfort or stability. He was a source of terror. Knotts would later describe his father as a paranoid schizophrenic, a man whose behavior was erratic and frightening. The home, which should have been a place of safety, was instead volatile and unpredictable. When Don was just 13 years old, his father died. The official cause was pneumonia, but the years of alcoholism had destroyed his health. For the family, his death was a complex tragedy. It meant the loss of a husband and a father, but it also meant the end of the chaos he brought with him. Elsie Knotts was left alone to raise 4 boys during the worst economic crisis in American history. She worked as a farmer and a seamstress, doing whatever it took to keep her family together and fed. She was the pillar of strength Don would lean on, the one stable presence in his life. By his own admission, Don was a shy and introverted child. He was small for his age and often bullied, which did little to help his self-confidence. He found escape in 2 places: the movies and his own imagination. He would watch the comedians on the silver screen and study their style. He also developed an interest in ventriloquism, practicing for hours with a dummy he named Danny. It was a way to perform, to be someone else, to make people laugh and gain their approval without having to be himself. After graduating from Morgantown High School, he enrolled at West Virginia University, where he pursued a degree in education with a minor in speech, graduating in 1948. But his education was interrupted by a larger calling. In 1943, during World War II, Don Knotts was drafted into the United States Army. He was assigned to the Special Services Branch, a unit dedicated to maintaining troop morale. Here, his childhood hobby became his military duty. He performed comedy and ventriloquism acts for the soldiers, using a different dummy he called Willie the Dummy. He rose to the rank of Technician Grade 5, and the experience was transformative. For the first time, he saw in a very real way that his ability to make people laugh had value. It was a lifeline for men far from home in a time of war. When he was discharged in 1946, he knew what he wanted to do with his life. After the war, Knotts returned to West Virginia to finish his degree, but his sights were set on entertainment. He moved to New York City, the heart of the industry, and began the slow, difficult climb. He worked in radio and on stage, honing his craft. His first real break came in 1953 with a role on the daytime soap opera Search for Tomorrow. It was an unlikely start for a comedian, but the role played to his strengths. He was cast as a nervous, high-strung character, a type he was beginning to perfect. Then came the appearance that would change everything. In 1956, he started making regular appearances on The Steve Allen Show. His segments, often playing a shaking, mumbling, nervous wreck opposite the calm Allen, were a sensation. He was no longer just a working comic, he was a national attraction. It was on The Steve Allen Show that he caught the attention of a fellow North Carolina native, Andy Griffith. When Griffith was eventually offered his own sitcom, he remembered the nervous comic from their time together on the variety show. He asked the producers to create a role specifically for Don Knotts. That role, of course, was Barney Fife, and it would change Knotts' life. From 1960 to 1965, Don Knotts, as Sheriff Andy Taylor's deputy, created one of the most beloved characters in television history. He won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards for Best Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series, a testament to his dominance in the role. He was, by any measure, a star. He followed The Andy Griffith Show with a successful film career, starring in a string of family comedies and television series. His career spanned over 6 decades. In 2004, TV Guide ranked him number 27 on its list of the 50 greatest TV stars of all time. To the world, he was a comedic genius, a man who had turned his own nervous energy into a fortune and a legacy. But the shy, insecure boy from Morgantown never really went away. And while his professional life was soaring, his personal life was already beginning to fray at the edges. The same anxieties that made him a star were about to take their toll on his first love and his first marriage. Don Knotts' first love. After serving in the military during the war, Don Knotts returned to West Virginia University, still shy and still unsure of himself. But he had a direction, and it was on that college campus that he met someone who would change his life. Her name was Catherine Metz. Catherine was, by all accounts, a woman of substance. She was the daughter of a Northern Baptist minister from Wheeling, West Virginia, and she carried herself with confidence. She was smart, grounded, and came from a stable, loving home. Everything the young Don Knotts had lacked as a child. They became college sweethearts, and for Don, Catherine represented a kind of anchor. She was drawn to his gentle nature and his sense of humor, while he was drawn to her steadiness and warmth. In 1947, shortly after Don graduated with his degree in education, the couple tied the knot. They were young, optimistic, and ready to take on the world together. The early years of their marriage were defined by the struggle that defines most artistic careers, the gap between having a dream and making a living from it. Don took whatever work he could find, performing in radio and on stage, while Catherine worked to help support them. She was his partner in the truest sense, believing in his talent during the years when few others did. They moved to New York City, and Catherine was there beside him as he worked hard and honed his craft. As Don's career began to accelerate, their lives changed. The family grew as well. They had 2 children, a daughter, Karen, born in 1954, and a son, Thomas, born a few years later. On the surface, it looked like the life he had always wanted. A loving wife, 2 healthy children, and a career that was finally taking off. He was balancing the demands of a growing family with the unpredictable hours of a working actor in New York. It was a delicate balance, but for a time it held. In 1960, The Andy Griffith Show went into production, and the Knotts family relocated to California. The show was an immediate hit, and Don Knotts became a star almost overnight. But the very success he had worked for his entire life began to place a new and immense pressure on his marriage. The schedule of a hit television show is relentless. Days started early and ended late. There were lines to memorize, scenes to block, and the constant pressure to be funny on command. For a man like Don Knotts, who already wrestled with deep-seated anxiety, the stress was magnified tenfold. The time he had once spent at home with Catherine and the children was now consumed by the demands of his career. Catherine, who had left her own support system behind in the East, found herself increasingly isolated in Los Angeles. She was raising 2 young children largely on her own, while her husband became a beloved figure to millions of people she would never meet. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, began to grow. The very traits that made Don a brilliant comedian, his nervous energy, his obsessive attention to detail, and his vulnerability, became liabilities in his personal life. He brought his work home with him, not in the form of scripts, but in the form of worry and exhaustion. The man who could make America laugh on Tuesday night often had nothing left to give his family by the weekend. Catherine had married a young, aspiring comic. But soon she found herself living with a television star, and the transition was not an easy one. The strain became too much to bear. In 1964, after over 17 years of marriage, Don and Catherine divorced. The official reason was irreconcilable differences, a vague term that covered a very specific pain. The pressures of his career, compounded by his personal struggles, had finally pulled them apart. Catherine Metz-Knotts returned to a quieter life away from the Hollywood spotlight. She was only 38 years old. 2 years later, on March 17, 1966, Catherine died. The specific cause of her death was not made public, and it remains a private matter to this day. What is known is that her passing was sudden and that it came far too soon. Don Knotts, who had been divorced from her for only 2 years, was left to process the loss of the woman who had believed in him before anyone else did. She was the mother of his children, his college sweetheart, and his first love. Her death marked the end of a chapter, but it did not mark the end of Don's search for companionship. In the years that followed, he would marry 2 more times, embarking on a chaotic and complicated romantic life that stood in stark contrast to the wholesome image he projected on screen. Don's search for stability. The death of Catherine Metz in 1966 closed a significant chapter in Don Knotts' life. He was now a single father to 2 children, Karen and Thomas, while simultaneously managing a career that had expanded from television into feature films. For 10 years after his divorce from Catherine, he remained unmarried, focused on his work and his children. Then, in 1974, he decided to try again, this time with a woman named Lauralee Chukna. Lauralee was in many ways the opposite of a Hollywood wife. She had no interest in the spotlight, no ambition to leverage her husband's fame for her own gain. In fact, very little is documented about her early life precisely because she chose to keep it that way. She was a private person who valued her anonymity, and she entered into a marriage with a man whose face was recognized by millions. From the beginning, this contrast created tension. Don Knotts was not a flamboyant celebrity by any means, but his work required him to be public. He did publicity tours, attended premieres, and made appearances. Lauralee would accompany him to some of these events, standing beside him for photographs. But she never seemed comfortable in that world. Her preference was for a quiet life away from the cameras. Their marriage lasted nearly a decade. During that time, Don's career went through a significant transition. The era of his starring film vehicles was winding down, and he was moving into a phase of guest appearances and character roles. Then, in 1979, he joined the cast of the hit sitcom Three's Company, playing the flustered and lecherous landlord, Ralph Furley. It was a role that introduced him to a new generation of viewers and revitalized his career. But professionally, the schedule was demanding. He was back in the grind of a weekly television series, with all the long hours and pressure that came with it. And through it all, the personal struggles that had shadowed him since childhood never really left. Don Knotts lived with chronic anxiety. Lauralee, who valued her privacy and her peace, found herself married to a man whose mind was a constant source of turmoil. The strain built slowly over the years. They tried to make it work. A decade is a long time to invest in a relationship, and they clearly wanted it to succeed. But the combination of his career pressures and his unrelenting personal struggles proved too great. In 1983, they divorced. Like his first marriage, the official reason was irreconcilable differences. And like his first marriage, the split was relatively quiet. There were no scandalous headlines or public fights. Lauralee simply retreated from his life as quietly as she had lived in it. She never gave an interview about their time together, never wrote a tell-all book. She simply returned to her private existence and stayed there. After the divorce from Lauralee, Don Knotts spent nearly 2 decades alone. He focused on his work, on his children, and on managing his personal struggles as best he could. He seemed to accept that perhaps marriage was not for him. But then, late in his life, he found a different kind of peace. In 2002, at the age of 78, Don Knotts married for the 3rd and final time. Her name was Frances Yarbrough. Frances was born in Georgia in 1927, making her just 3 years younger than Don. She had worked as an administrative secretary and had a brief minor foray into acting in the 1970s, with a single credited film role in a low-budget picture called The Electric Chair. But by the time she met Don, those days were long behind her. Their relationship was fundamentally different from his previous marriages. By this point, Don's health was beginning to decline in earnest. He was no longer the energetic comic running around a soundstage. He was an elderly man facing the natural challenges of aging. Frances became his steady companion, his caregiver, and his source of comfort. She was known for her supportive presence. She accompanied him to events when he needed her, and she stayed by his side at home when he did not. There was no pressure of a burgeoning career to contend with, no young children to raise. It was just the two of them, navigating his final years together. Frances Yarborough did not pursue fame or attention. She preferred the background, and that was exactly where Don needed her to be. Their marriage, though brief compared to his others, was marked by a stability and devotion that had eluded him for most of his life. She was the woman who gave Don Knotts peace at the end of his life. But even that peace could not protect him from the other heartbreaking struggles he carried with him until the very end. The heartbreaking struggles of Don Knotts. Behind his laughter, the 5 Emmy Awards, and the decades of adoring fans, Don Knotts carried a burden that never truly lifted. He struggled with anxiety and hypochondria his entire life, battles that shaped not only his career, but also every personal relationship he ever had. The roots of this struggle ran deep, all the way back to his childhood. Growing up with a father suffering from schizophrenia and alcoholism created a childhood defined by unpredictability and fear. A young boy never knew which version of his father would come through the door. That constant state of alert, that hyper-awareness of potential danger, became embedded in his nervous system. He learned early that the world was not a safe place, and his mind never fully unlearned that lesson. As a teenager, he experienced what would now be recognized as panic attacks, though at the time there was no language for it. He simply felt overwhelmed by waves of fear that seemed to come from nowhere. He worried constantly about everything, but especially about his health. A minor headache was not just a headache. It seemed like a brain tumor. A cough was not just a cough. It felt like pneumonia. This pattern of thinking, this conviction that his body was betraying him, would follow him into adulthood and intensify as he aged. By the time he achieved fame, Don Knotts was living with a diagnosed anxiety disorder and severe hypochondria, conditions he worked hard to keep hidden from the public. The irony, of course, is that these very struggles became the foundation of his comedy. He discovered early that he could take the fear he felt inside and transform it into something that made people laugh. The nervous energy that might have crippled him in another context became his greatest professional asset. When he made others laugh at the things that frightened him, the fear lost some of its power, but it never disappeared entirely. Behind the scenes of The Andy Griffith Show, Don often struggled with stage fright, even though he had been performing for years. He would worry about his lines, about his performance, and about whether the audience would laugh. His hypochondria also created additional challenges. He frequently visited doctors, convinced he was dying of some disease, only to be reassured that he was in perfect health. These episodes were not manipulative or attention-seeking. They were genuine expressions of the terror he lived with. Friends and colleagues learned to accommodate his fears, offering the reassurance he constantly needed. Andy Griffith, in particular, understood his friend's struggles and provided a steady, calm presence that Don relied on. Work became his primary coping mechanism. The stage lights and the cameras created a kind of sanctuary, a place where he had control and where his fears could be transformed into laughter. Later in life, he did seek professional help. He entered therapy and began taking medication to manage his anxiety. It was not something he talked about publicly. In his era, mental health struggles carried a stigma that discouraged openness, especially for a beloved television star. But privately, he acknowledged his limitations and tried to address them. His daughter Karen, who later wrote about their relationship, described a father who was warm and loving but also deeply fragile, a man who carried his burdens quietly and rarely let anyone see the full weight of them. Despite the external validation, the Emmys, the box office success, and the standing ovations. Don Knotts never fully believed in himself. He suffered from profound self-doubt, a persistent feeling that he was not good enough, that he was one mistake away from being exposed as a fraud. He worried about being typecast as Barney Fife, fearing that he would never escape the shadow of his most famous role. Even at the height of his fame, even after proving himself again and again, he questioned his own talent. The fame that made him beloved by millions also contributed to his isolation. He was not a man who thrived on attention. He lived quietly, avoided Hollywood parties, and kept a small circle of friends. The same sensitivity that made him a brilliant comedian also made him vulnerable to the demands of celebrity. He gave so much of himself on screen that he had little left for the social obligations that came with stardom. These struggles did not end with age or success. They followed him through decades of performances, through the final years of his life. And among all those struggles, there was one the world would come to know as his biggest regret. Don Knotts' biggest regret. By 1965, Don Knotts was at the absolute peak of his powers. He had won 5 Emmy Awards in 5 years, a feat that remains almost unheard of in television. Barney Fife had become a cultural phenomenon, and the show itself was a ratings juggernaut. By any rational measure, Don Knotts had everything an actor could want. And yet, that year, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He left the Andy Griffith Show. The decision was not made lightly, nor was it made out of anger or resentment toward Andy Griffith. The two men were close friends, and they remained close friends until the very end. The departure was driven by something far more complicated, a combination of ambition, uncertainty, and what Don later described as a fundamental misunderstanding about the show's future. He had been approached by Universal Studios with a 5-picture film deal, an opportunity to transition from supporting player on television to leading man on the big screen. It was the kind of offer that actors dream about, a chance to prove that his talents extended beyond the streets of Mayberry. At the time Don signed the contract, he believed the Andy Griffith Show was coming to an end. There had been discussions, rumors, and a sense among the cast that the series might not continue beyond its 5th season. Don later explained that he never would have left if he had known Andy planned to keep going. But by the time Andy confirmed the show would continue, the film contract was already signed. Universal was not about to let him out of the deal. And so, Don Knotts walked away from the most successful role of his career, leaving behind the character that had made him a star. The reaction was immediate and intense. Fans were confused and disappointed. Media outlets speculated about behind-the-scenes conflicts, inventing feuds where none existed. The prevailing narrative, despite being false, took hold in the public imagination. That Don Knotts and Andy Griffith had fallen out, that ego or money had driven them apart. Both men spent decades denying these rumors, insisting that their friendship never wavered. Andy, in particular, expressed his own regret about Don's departure, wishing there had been a way to keep him on the show. The film career that followed was neither a failure nor the triumph Don had hoped for. He starred in a series of family comedies for Universal, but they were not the blockbusters that would have silenced his critics and justified his departure from television. Hollywood insiders began to whisper that Don Knotts was a one-note performer, a man who had found a successful formula and could not break free from it. Don was aware of this criticism, and it stung. He had left the security of television to prove he could do more, only to find himself trapped in the same archetype, now in a less prestigious medium. In later years, Don reflected on his decision to leave the Andy Griffith Show with a mixture of acceptance and regret. He understood why he had made the choice, given the information he had at the time. But he also recognized that walking away from Mayberry was a mistake because he had left behind something irreplaceable. And while he would later return to the show for guest appearances, welcomed back with open arms by Andy and the cast, it was never quite the same. The regret over leaving Mayberry was not the only burden Don carried. As the years passed, his health began to decline, and the struggles he had managed for decades became harder to contain. The final chapter of his life would be marked by loss, decline, and an end that stood in stark contrast to the laughter he had given the world. The tragic decline of Don Knotts. In his late 70s, Knotts was diagnosed with macular degeneration, a progressive eye disease that gradually destroys central vision. For a man who had built his career on visual comedy, on the precise timing of a widened eye or a double take, the diagnosis was particularly cruel. He described his vision as blurry and distorted. Reading became difficult. Driving became impossible. Recognizing faces, even those of close friends, required effort and concentration. Despite these challenges, he did not retreat entirely from public life. He participated in awareness campaigns for the American Macular Degeneration Foundation, appearing in videos to show that people could live fulfilling lives even with the condition. He continued working as long as he could. Acting had always been his refuge, the one place where his fears receded and he felt in control. However, other health problems were accumulating beneath the surface. Knotts developed lung cancer, a disease that spread and weakened his body's ability to fight infection. In February 2006, he was admitted to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where pneumonia set in, complicated by the cancer and his age. His daughter Karen visited him regularly, sitting by his bedside in those final days. And Andy Griffith, his friend of more than 40 years, came to say goodbye. On February 24, 2006, Don Knotts died. He was 81 years old. The official cause was pulmonary and respiratory complications of pneumonia related to lung cancer. He was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, a quiet cemetery that holds the remains of many Hollywood legends. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at around $3 million. His assets included a Beverly Hills home valued at approximately $1.3 million, along with decades of residuals and royalties from his various film and voice roles. In accordance with his wishes, his estate went primarily to his third wife, Frances Yarbrough Knotts. His children from his first marriage, Karen and Thomas, were also remembered, but Frances was the central figure in his inheritance. Frances Yarbrough Knotts lived quietly after her husband's death, preserving his memory in private until her own death on October 28, 2013. She was reportedly buried in the same cemetery as Don, at Westwood Village Memorial Park, resting beside the man she had loved at the end of his life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.